Undeniably, the world remains plagued by crisis and a host of enduring injustices owed to colonial power and domination.
In turn, countless revolutionary thinkers from times past and present have identified modernity as a point source of oppression.
When taking stock of the violent ways in which modernity was and continues to be forged, the Caribbean has been ground zero. That is the crucible of modernity.
As an intervention that centers the Caribbean, this season of Surviving Society will provide a window into several of the region's grassroots struggles for land, life, and liberation.
On today's episode, we spoke with Bharath, a self-proclaimed soil-to-seed worker in the cocoa and chocolate domain who found her roots and mission by being anchored alongside cocoa trees and farmers. Sarah focuses on regenerative agricultural systems and works directly with farmers to co-create solutions to field-based and processing challenges through teaching applied science in the real world of cocoa.
Sarah, we were discussing earlier, as well as have discussed on several occasions, a lot of the varying and different challenges, obstacles, not to mention even just basically dynamics that emerge at the nexus of food systems in the Caribbean, people trying to engage in livelihood strategies and make a go of it in a context of escalating climate breakdown, of which the Caribbean is on the front lines of, not to mention too, also what is arguably an exploitative global economy. And then too, in realizing, and I know that this is front and center of your in your work and efforts, the degree to which working at the ground level, being engaged with communities, as well as in being connected to the environment, nature, as well as into thinking about well-being, spirituality, culture, all of these things to some degree with respect to the food system have been disordered, disrupted, and affected in a variety of different ways by broadly what the series we're focusing on is about, modernity. So if you even think about the connotations, this is what it takes to become an advanced, industrialized, developed country, or we need to modernize agriculture, quote unquote, and throughout the Caribbean. These sorts of narratives have been operating for decades and generations, as well as have come with a host of consequences, environmentally, politically, culturally, socially. I'm wondering, before we dive into some of these broad challenges in this theme of modernity, maybe if you can just start by telling us a bit about some of the work you do, what you're engaged in, as well as into maybe some of those challenges, as well as into potential solutions to the things you've identified as being something that needs to change with respect to agriculture, food systems, as well as in even to the economic and social realities of the Caribbean.
Wow, that's a tall order there, Levi. I don't even know if I'm ready to speak at the level of the Caribbean because I could, because there are so many shared experiences, but then there are also so many unique experiences across the islands based on our different histories, right? I tend to be very wary of going beyond certain borders that I'm not familiar with and making generalizations. So I think for now, I'll want to confine it to at least my experiences here in Trinidad and then what I'm starting to experience with my work up the region. Yeah. Right. So a little bit about what I do, where I came from with this, where I am now and what has brought me to that point. I'm a plant scientist by training. So I came to the land through academia. And looking back on that now, part of me is really sad about that. I feel deprived in some ways. But at the time, coming back to one of my favorite lines about context being everything, and really, not shaming or blaming or saying that it's this one's fault or that's one's fault that I didn't do this and I didn't do that. At the time that I entered the university, we were, and we still are, in a phase where agriculture and doing an agricultural degree was considered, oh, you couldn't get into medicine. Oh, you couldn't get into vet school. Oh, you don't want to be a lawyer, an engineer. Oh, you don't have the grades. Okay, so the agriculture faculty became this quote unquote dumping ground for those who had nowhere else to go. Yeah. And it was an expensive dumping ground because the agri program cost a lot more than the natural sciences program. And at the time, my dad, the only one in the family who was employed, he had to put my brother and myself through university. My brother wanted to do engineering, the more expensive, of the two options on the table. So I defaulted to the natural sciences, right? Then I didn't see that, essentially the proverbial path was being laid before me. But now in hindsight, I can see that it was, yeah. So I got into a dual major, if you want to call it that, a joint major of biochemistry and botany, immersed myself in the plant world. And when I came out of my first degree, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Because I have this degree and I can't even be employed to sell DVDs. I actually was rejected from a company that sold soap. The lady told me, no, you can't even sell soap. I can't sell a thing to save my life, right? This has important implications going forward when it comes to economies and what we consider valuable things, sale, trade, etc., right? And what we consider important versus what's really important. Anyway, so shortly after my first degree stint and a hefty student loan to be repaid, I fell into the field of working with cacao, right? I started off with a small project in the Department of Food Production, working on tomatoes, in which the methanol industry was frothing at the mouth with how much money they were going to make, or at least they were hoping to make off of this fantastic discovery. I think it was by some American researchers, I'm not sure. They found that if you sprayed you sprayed certain plants that they were working on with methanol, it really bumped up the harvest, right? So the local industry got dizzy because Trinidad is a big methanol producer, as you might know. They got really dizzy with how much money they were going to make in the agricultural sector. And for those who don't know, we're very much a petroleum-based economy. And so we're very seduced by certain things, inclusive of chemical agriculture, right? The force is strong in the chem ag space in Trinidad. And I grew up in it. I know farmers who that's all they know. So conversations in any other direction have been, if not outright impossible, extremely difficult, right? But at the time that I entered the space, it's what I was introduced to. So I thought it was the natural way to go, right? And then when I saw an opening at the cocoa research unit, I was invited to apply. And at first I was like, why would I do that? Everybody there looks depressed. And, like the students are not graduating. What's going on? The walls of the corridors just look sterile and everybody just looks sad. Why would I want to work in a crop like that? But here we are. I entered for 1 year. At least I said to myself that it would be 1 year. And 13 years later, I emerged from the research unit, having learned, I guess, all that I could have learned at that point in time, right? From an academic point of view, learning how to design projects, how to execute research studies, how to write the fancy journal papers, how to talk about we're doing this for the farmers and we're doing that for the industry, and getting huge grants. And well, other people were flying here, there, and everywhere. I wasn't, which burned me. But anyway, the point is we were doing all of these things that academics do and patting ourselves on the back for how much we were contributing. And I'm not saying, no, we didn't contribute, but I personally started to feel like a fraud when I recognized that, wait, hold on, after all of these workshops and sensitization meetings and all of this training over all these years and millions of dollars of programs, why are farmers in Trinidad still like almost 50 plus years behind with basic understanding of how to work with this crop? Questions were not even being asked as to how this crop should be managed. Are the recommendations that we have, at least this was then, are those recommendations still applicable now? Has the science of plant physiology, etc., has it moved forward in a direction that allows us to revisit what we've been recommending to farmers? Do we need to change? But nobody wanted to get off that train of, well, this is how it's always been done. Yeah. And who are you to question, you little research technician? So, I really quietly just, I had my questions, I had my grumbles, but I did not feel confident enough in the space, not only as an academic in training, as a researcher in training, but also as a female in the space, because it's very male dominated, not just the academic environment, but the agricultural environment here, and definitely in the cocoa space. Because of the historical dynamics, it's very much led by men, right? So it was a case of, know your place, stay in your lane, and don't question the PhDs and the professors, right? So anyway, my 13 years taught me a lot of what I guess I can't say that I wanted, because I didn't know what I wanted then. I felt very directionless as a contributor to society, from the academic point of view, right? But it's when I started to really have those growing pangs of, oh my God, you're such a fraud. You're talking about helping the farmers, and this is what is really happening on the ground, and everybody's unhappy. Okay. I had to walk away. A number of things conspired to ensure that I was not taken back into the matrix. And yay for that, because I really begged to get back into the matrix. I will tell you, I really begged to get back into the matrix, because I felt that, I should give back to the university and to the research unit. And I have so much to give now. And well, that was not to happen. And everything for a reason, a really good reason, It was when I could not return there, and the employment situation at the Ministry of Agriculture was just not happening. We had a bit of a hiring freeze because of the economic situation at that point in time. It really threw me into the bushes, because I'm like, okay, great. Now I have 2 degrees and I still can't get a job. Okay. I have all of this expertise. Nobody's going to pay me for this expertise. What are we going to do? Right. So anyway, that morphed into me just volunteering my time on the land, whoever would let me in their space, to start literally donating my time. Okay. And I use the fact that fortunately I had friends and colleagues in this space from my pure plant science world who were into doing EIAs, environmental impact assessment surveys. We all consider them very soul sucking. You get to do what you love. You're out there working with plants, identifying, recognizing the uniqueness of habitats, why things should be defended, to have a life, have a space, have a place in the ecosystem. And then the entities that request the EIAs will simply edit out what they want from the report to be able to lobby for the parking lot, Starbucks, or whatever else they want to insert in X location, right? So anyway, so that's how I made my part-time money to fuel the volunteer work that I was doing with farmers. Okay. And I, hands down, I'm ever so grateful for that, because that is when I really started to learn how to work with cacao. 13 years of research gave me a very interesting, but very singular filter into how to work with this plant. Now, notice how I'm saying it, work with this plant. It did not speak to the wider environment in which this plant is embedded, okay? And that is something that I had to learn very fast. I can't say that I'm there yet. Nobody's there yet, because it's so deep, it's so wide, it's so tall. There's so much complexity that, as I always say, for folks who know me, especially on my social media profile on Instagram, keep it humble, human. There's a lot you have not yet seen, okay? And there's a lot we are prepared to show you. And that is one thing I consider cacao my gateway plant, right? It's my gateway plant. I didn't think so when I was going through 13 years of research, when folks would ask me, so what do you do? I would derail everybody by saying, oh, I pick and wash leaves for a living. And they'd be like, what? But that's what I did as part of my research work, right? I picked and washed a lot of leaves, okay? For a good cause. I was working on diseases in cacao. But the point is, my time at the research unit, fortunately, thanks to the mentors that I had in the space, I was given the opportunity to train in every single aspect of cacao, from disease to the agronomy, to the genetics, to the processing, to the value addition, all of the good stuff that speaks to the market now, okay? But it spoke to me on a level that looked very singularly at the plant. There were no social conversations about the people in the space, minding, working with these plants, right? No talk about the wider ecosystem that supports the survival and thriving, not just the survival, but just the thriving nature of this plant and its companions in this space. Okay, so there was a lot that was lacking, but to be fair, they have their mandate. And as good academics, they do what is under that mandate, right? But I clearly was not destined to stay within those ranks. Okay, so when I left, like I said, and I started working with farmers, that's when I recognized very, very quickly that my quote unquote contribution to the space was less about me quote unquote bringing knowledge to them. It was more a case of me spending time listening to them to understand what exactly are your needs here. Because as an academic, I was trained, okay, so you need to identify the problem and you need to list the objectives and you need to, and everything is extremely well, neat and tidy. And it has to fit into, maybe 250 words, all of that good stuff. But when you get out there, it's like 100 million different experiments being run at the same time. Biological, chemical, physical, psychological, you name it, it's happening in the space, okay? And so with my well-intentioned self thinking, yeah, we're going to be talking about processing and, production and varietals and genetics from now till, the cows come home. And then I started realizing, no, when these farmers have bigger pools of worry and cacao is already a drain on their production system, but they have this uncanny, inexplicable love-hate relationship in that space, it's taking them to the grave. And I kid you not, it's taking them to the grave. And they will not, for the life of them, say, you know what, I think it's time to call it a day. I've had to sit with farmers, in some cases, literally hold their hands while the tears just flowed. And it's like, Sarah, how can you ask me to just walk away from this? It's like they're my children. You don't just abandon your children. You spend all your years, bathing and feeding and clothing and all of that good stuff. And now you just want me to walk away from them. And I would have to sit with that because the pain for them on so many levels was very real, right? Because the kind of pleasure that they derived from spending time in the planted space, the disconnect to reconnect that they would go through, whether it was every day or every weekend, I could see it in their faces. I could see it in their body language when they spoke about it. But at the same time, they would say to me, I can't even afford to buy my husband or my wife a new pair of shoes or a new dress. I have no retirement plan. I have no emergency medical fund. So let's revisit this love and the logic with this love here. If this is not working, something has got to change, right? So anyway, in the space, I did get, and I still do get, a chance to dig deep into the science and bring the current scientific understandings to the farmers. And we discuss and we explore, okay, what's been done traditionally? What indigenous knowledge is there with respect to working with this crop and everything else that is in the planted space there? Let's take a look at why you're being asked by the higher ups, the industry that's demanding X quality and this bean size and that particular variety, and everything just seems to be tracking you down this really, really narrow tunnel, right? Why are they asking for this? Why are they asking you to pay so much more attention to quality when it seems just, I exaggerate, but a handful of years ago, they were taking whatever came because they were about making numbers, right? They wanted quantity. Quality fell under the bus, right? So I've had to really learn to walk the path of, I don't want to use the word extension services because more and more I'm having issue with that expression, right? As I dig deeper into, the phenomenal work of so many people in the space who've been looking very, very carefully at the social side of agriculture and the words that we use and the damage that they can do, the power they can have to heal. Yeah. So it's learning ground for me as well, for sure. And that's why I'm very measured, or at least I try to be very measured in how I speak about certain things, because I feel so much like a baby in this terrain, even though I've been in it for 20 plus years, which is really just a blip in the bucket, right? But it has me intimidated because I have no flight plan. I have no blueprint, right? Because when you're dealing with people, you don't know what you're going to get in any given circumstance, because their context is so unique to them, where they're situated, what their past experiences have been that I may never be privy to, but which color how they respond to me as someone coming into the space, me having to manage, for want of a better word, how I'm perceived in the space. Because as I've said to my farmers, and I continue to say it all the time, one, I do not consider myself an expert in the field of what I do. I have quite a bit of experience, but so do you. And the aim is to bring those experiences together so that the proverbial sum of the parts it's greater, right? So I find myself in a very, not necessarily unique, because I'm sure there are others, they're very much going through similar parallel experiences. But I feel from my journey in this, I feel very unique in that I'm getting the chance as a scientist, as a researcher at the core, I'm getting the chance to connect to the very soul of what is really going on, and still having an opportunity to bring the science, demystify the science, not only for me, but for them, so that we have this shared adventure in the space, right? And I will say this, with the work that I've been doing, pretty much on my own, and I say on my own, not to trivialize the contributions of anybody else, but there are certain things I've had to navigate alone, like I said, because there's been no blueprint, okay? And I did not go to agriculture extension school to learn all of the methodologies and all of that. I love it when Levi just goes on and on. I could listen to him for days because it's just it's so enlightening, because it finally gives me the words that I didn't have, things that I felt, things that I saw, but I couldn't put into structures, right? Part of me, when I walked away from academia, I went through quite a purging phase where I was really disgusted with academia. I was disgusted with how science was being conducted in the space, et cetera, and I disconnected and went into languages instead, just to completely get away from science, right? But that taught me a lot about vulnerability. It taught me a lot about putting myself in somebody else's quote unquote shoes, having to function in spaces where you don't even know if people understand what you're saying, but you have to find a way to get that message across. Yeah. And I've held on ever so tightly to those experiences, as well as I say to folks when I share with them, I know what it's like to feel like the dumbest person in the room. Okay. When you're surrounded by academics who insist on filling the room with their egos, yeah, and they need you to know that there's not even room in that corner over there for you. So don't even speak. It's like, we're the authority here. We decide what, when, where, how, why, who. Okay. Or maybe I gave them that power. There's a part of me in my evolution in the space alongside farmers and looking at what has been happening with our food systems, looking at what has been happening, starting with the soil. Okay. Starting to question everything I learned at university. I've had to throw it into the bin and start over. And it was very disconcerting for me initially, right? But now it's extremely liberating, and I'm on a mission to liberate everybody else. Put it that way. And guess what? Guess what's my gateway drug for that? Chocolate. If anybody had told me that in my time with cacao, that I would go from, chief leaf picker and washer to chocolate maker, to use it as a tool to teach folks, or rather, not to teach folks, to have people reconnect with their senses, reconnect with their very being, and then reconnect with the land through taste and deep sensorial experiences. I would have been like, oh, please, give me a break. No way, no how. But fortunately, because of the fact that I was, released from academic bondage, and I was let loose into the world, and farmers took me under their wings, and they mentored me, and it gave me a chance to really pay attention to what is really important. Building community how? Having conversations how? Having that sharing of knowledge, expertise how? Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not about the technology. The technologies will come and go, right? But it's how do we communicate with each other? How honest are we being with each other? How vulnerable are we being with each other? And with our lack of understanding in the space, having just adopted what came before without questioning, there seems to be a sense, on the ground, at least based on my limited experiences, folks seem to think that if they question, it necessarily means that they don't agree with what came before. And in some cases, they may feel like they're dishonoring the ancestors by questioning, and that is not the case. So a big part of my work is very much about the questioning. It's very much about the pushback. There are things that I will say and do to nudge them in a particular direction, to get a reaction, to have them recognize that you have a voice. Don't let anybody tell you, well, we're here to give voice to the farmers. The farmers have voices. They have many voices, diverse voices, and they all need to be heard, right? So when I as I get deeper with that, using the gateway drug that is chocolate, and looking at how the cultures in the Caribbean have worked with this crop, how we've built our own traditions around it, modern and otherwise, right? And recognizing how powerful food is as a connector, how food is meant to bring people and systems together. That's when I realized, okay, Cacao, I see what you've been doing here for the last 23 years. This is it, game on. Yeah, so I feel like I've entered a whole new labyrinth, Levi, to be honest. It's deeply humbling. And the more I dig into the social side of things, I mean, I won't lie. I get really exhausted when I have to go into like deep treaties about, the political and all the other things that you academics are really good at, unpacking. I rely on your ability to unpack these things so that I can just deal with the ABCs, because that is what I am about in this space. Demystify, decode. I don't want to say translate, because there can be things lost in translation, right? But essentially make it into bite-sized pieces that allow folks to grab it and then take it and run with it. Because my job, as I think I've already expressed this to Levi on a number of occasions, my job is not done if anybody I'm working with feels like they have to come back to me for my expertise, right? And when I've said this to farmers, they're like, what do you mean we're not going to need you anymore? And I'm like, I'm not into the umbilical cord in this space. Academia has done enough of that. Other systems have done enough of that. You have what it takes to be autonomous, to be an independent thinker, to question, to find the solutions for yourselves, among yourselves, but together. Yeah. So my job is to make sure that, okay, what's new, the understandings, are they relevant for your situation? Are they not? Why not? They might be relevant for your next door neighbor. Why is it relevant there and not here? So getting folks to recognize that there's no one formula, there's no recipe, as much as we want the recipe, right? We want the solutions in a box. We want the bugs in a jug, right? To just add to the soil. We're moving away from chemicals, but we're moving into a different thing where, you know, folks are referring to soil health and all of that. But then it comes back to the bugs in a jug, and somebody has to pay for that. And I am not about that, right? That may be an intermediate, that may be an intervention, but it has to be part of a bigger, more regenerative system, right? And we don't do that by keeping umbilical cords alive in the space. Yeah. So,
Sarah, that was wonderful. You're basically answering questions preemptively before I even have a chance to ask them.
Dang it, Levi.
No, it's a whirlwind tour of some of the structural and historical dynamics and challenges that exist in the region, as well as then too lots of allusions to potential solutions as well as directions to go in. I mean, just clocking some of the things you were saying: humility, soul, connection, autonomous, critical thinking, these sorts of things, as well as then too not pulling punches, as well as being very critical of the trappings and limitations of bourgeois institutions, instrumental industrialized ways of approaching growing food, building and constructing an economy. What happens when land and labor are put in the service of profit motives and market forces versus perhaps putting land and labor in the service of spiritual well-being, a sense of deep connection with each other, these sorts of things. You're touching upon all of these things that I think are significant, as well as then to just deeply human with respect to what does it mean to be human, connection, as well as then too the way you were talking about the ways in which farmers have deeply rooted knowledges that are legitimate, even though bourgeois institutions may not necessarily give them credentials or legitimize them in the ways that they should be. But also, and I mean, it reminds me of, I'm a huge fan of Livia Campesina, one of the world's largest social movements. And it seems like a lot of their emancipatory politics and approaches are very much what you're engaging in on a day-to-day basis. But they very much talk about, as well as advocate for, dialogues across knowledges, campesina a campesina, or peasant to peasant. And when I use the word peasant is not a dirty word.
No,
you're talking about the ways in which the lasting legacies of colonial hierarchies have created respectability politics, so that working the land or being engaged in agriculture all of a sudden doesn't carry as much social currency as maybe some other profession that might make more money or be seemingly more socially acceptable. Talking about sort of the stigma of working the land, being a land worker, these sorts of things. You mentioned several things I want to ask about. One of them, you had mentioned some of those entities where, for example, you were doing environmental impact assessment, and here's sort of the implications and consequences of this project. And then you alluded to entities, and all of a sudden then it turns into a parking lot, then it turns into maybe a multinational corporate chain, these sorts of things. So I'm wondering, in terms of, one, the historical yet contemporary forces that are at play with respect to what's shaping agriculture and farming. Then also, too, you've mentioned in a very enlightening as well as critical way, kind of conventional logics or orthodox approaches to agriculture, as well as then, too, the ways in which relying upon industrialized chemicals, pesticides, as well as then, too, thinking about growing food and these sorts of things. I mean, a quick survey of the region, some parts of the Caribbean are importing 80% or more of their food. And when you think about what is possible with the soil in the Caribbean, is there an alternative? These sorts of things. But it also reminds me of something that is also worth mentioning, what lies at sort of the roots of these problems, ongoing colonial legacies, as well as into perhaps one of the most violent and brutal institutions ever to be implemented, not only in the Caribbean, but across the world, the colonial plantation, right? Plantation logics, some revolutionary thinkers from the Caribbean sort of saying, we're still grappling with the lasting consequences and legacies of plantation societies, plantation logics, plantation economies. One key thing, sort of at the heart of this, is the violence and ripple effect of the plantation. Aside from maybe doing a deep dive and placing the plantation under the microscope, back to what I could have asked in a more cogent way. In terms of thinking about agriculture and farming, what are some of those conventional approaches that are problematic? And then why do you think that they have lasted so long and become so durable? And if you, in addressing those, also want to talk about what potential solutions are there. So if it's basically like, if we want to disrupt or unsettle convention, which it very much seems like you're doing, what direction should things be going in?
But let's start with, let me start from where I stand in the field, what I'm seeing, right? Because cocoa was very much part of that plantation dynamics here in this country, all right? And we still have the vestiges of that in the space, and the belief that we can only make cacao work in this country if we have massive acreages, right? When it comes to working with the land, well, for starters, one of the things that really stands out for me most clearly, in a very, very visceral way, now that I'm at a point where I'm experiencing it personally, this whole issue of access to land tenure, okay, lands that would have been taken from peoples many, many, many moons ago, the unfairness of what is happening with land, despite, I guess, in some cases, some useful efforts to, regularize and really begin to clean up the mess that is land tenure in this country, right? The land grab that is going on by those who have the money to be able to grab it, the underground economy that's keeping prices very high. So even if you're young, middle-aged, old, and you want to get into having a piece of land that you can connect with and do something of value with for yourself, for your community, it's almost impossible. Yeah, financially, just not. It's just not possible, and it's heartbreaking. Okay, and when I look at the implications, I mean, there are many, but the one that I want to focus on, the implications of not having access to land that you can, let's say, comfortably have a plan for, to work with sustainably. Yeah, if you know that this land is going to be taken from you, or it's certainly not yours to legally use for any extended period of time, there's no consideration of, let's work this land in a regenerative manner. Let's build the soil. No. I need to make money now. I need to make money within the next week, 2 months, 3 months, and then I move on. So it's just this very, very, maybe for want of a better word, nomadic behavior on the land. You use, you abuse, and you move on, because at the end of the day, well, it's not mine. So why should I care? And I keep seeing it over and over in the space, even with well-intentioned folks. Land is, caught in family battles. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I see how there are people who want another way to work with land, even if it's not theirs for a lifetime. There are many people who, they don't believe in ownership of land. They do believe in stewardship of land, right? But to get access to the land, to realize that, it's a whole other story. Yeah. So we find ourselves let me speak for me, right? As a service provider in the space, wanting to open the conversations, and more importantly, the actions tied to those conversations about soil health, land restoration, remediation of zones that have been raped, pillaged, burned through our mining activities, slash and burn activities, right? How can I sensibly have that conversation with folks for whom the pool of worry is, how am I going to pay for that thing tomorrow? And that thing being medicine, somebody's surgery, child's education, et cetera, right? So I find myself in scenarios where I'm dealing with pools of worry that really overshadow the best of intentions with respect to shifting and changing the paradigm in the space with respect to how agriculture is done here, right? And that put me into, a bit of a depressed mode for quite some time, but I found myself having to, shake it off and recognize that, listen, I can't take on the entire system myself, but I can take on a small part of it right where I am with the people right next to me. And starting with the farmers with whom I've built considerable rapport over the years. I have focused my efforts on working where there's resonance and letting that resonance be the energy that goes forward. Because as those of us in the space who work with farmers or have the privilege of seeing how information, innovations, everything is diffused in a space, folks will, especially farmers, they will trust other farmers because they know they have the shared risk in some cases. Yes, they can at least identify with, oh, if this works for you, you're willing to take this risk. Maybe I should too. Yeah. And it has been far more efficient than having external folks like, I dare say, me come in and preach on my little soapbox about, well, we should do this and we should do that, and let's do it together. And then at the end of the day, I go home and I know where the next paycheck may be coming from, but they don't. Yeah. So it's very complex. It's not complex and complicated are not the same thing for me, right? It can be complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And yes, we're dealing with very complex issues in the space, but this is where we need all hands on deck. At least that's how I view it. We need all hands on deck because everyone is going to have a slightly different angle around the table. Everyone is going to have slightly different, well, sometimes very dramatically different skills to bring to the table to find that co-created solution in the space. Yeah. And that's what I've been trying to leverage. It's slow. Change is very slow, especially when you're dealing with mindsets, because that's the biggest thing when it comes to life, right? But if I were to zoom into the agricultural space, it's the mindset that we have to learn to navigate, okay, in order to just slightly crack open that door or that window. Once it's open, there's no closing it again. That's one thing my small time in this space has shown me. It's about taking the time to understand where are the avenues to have that conversation open, that conversation door be open even wider. And the way we generally execute exchange of knowledge, technology transfer in inverted commas in the space is, it's just brought and tossed into the space with the bells and whistles, right? And time, because everybody's on an 8 to 4 clock, we don't have enough time to do this or explore that. And maybe we'll have to write another project to deal with the social aspect. How do we bring in social workers? And then it's forgotten because one part of academia doesn't really consider the social sciences real science, which to me, well, let's not even go there. That's another soapbox I'll get on another time. But therein lies our problem. We continue to work in silos even when we say we want to not work in silos. Yeah. Because again, everybody, and it's unfortunately, for now, based on how our collective education systems, it's a part of us. I don't believe that it's innate to us. It's something that we've learned from the space, which means it can be unlearned. But it's how do we start? How do we have those first uncomfortable conversations about the real things, the real pools of worry that will then allow us to say, okay, this is how we can navigate X, Y, and Z, but we can also address that while we deal with the healing of the land. Brilliant man who said that the healing of the land and the purification of the human spirit are the same. I think, apologies to all and sundry, I think it's Fukuoka. It's a very, very, very powerful quote that When I first read it years ago, I'm like, hey, that's a nice quote. And then I moved on. Now that I'm deep in the trenches years later, every time I look at it, there's so much to unpack in that one line. And this is for me, the work that I'm doing. I'm hoping that as we go along together, alongside each other, making the mistakes, having the so-called failures and learning from them, having the tremendous successes and celebrating them together, we recognize how much it's a parallel healing. This is not about being hippie in the space, because I deal with certain, when I have to train certain sectors in the domain, they have no concept of where this bean actually comes from in terms of a plant. They just know they've gone to X location, they've bought this bag of beans, or it's been delivered to them, and then they make magnificent creations and then refer to it as X Global North chocolate. You don't have trees there. What are you talking about, right? You need to give credit where it's due. I'm not saying no to the absolute craftsmanship of the chocolate makers, but I'm adamant that we have got to include in the conversation, in these references, that the magic started at origin. The magic started with the know-how of the producer, the willingness of that producer to work with this crop and its companions in the space in a particular way that will then yield this very nutrient-dense, flavor-filled bean that then sells for exorbitant amounts of money when it's transformed into chocolate and chocolate, other cocoa-derived products, right? But at the end of the day, if we don't have that first part of the chain, it's all going to collapse. And for some reason, far too many people in the industry seem to conveniently forget that. Yes, they refer to it in a very cursory fashion. And, we have all sorts of greenwashing going on with respect to, the talking about sustainability and, organic techniques and permaculture and regenerative agriculture. And the terms are being bandied about. But when you look deeper, what exactly are you regenerating? Is it going deeper than just your social media hype? Is it going deeper than just the plant system? The bigger regen conversation is around all in the space, all. You can't have one without the other. It then just becomes something very mechanistic, as it has been with, the Green Revolution and with chemical agriculture. It's all about the recipes. It's all about produce, produce, produce. We want results. And nobody cares about, what's happening in between. We can't, the system is collapsing. It's showing very clearly it is collapsing. And there are lots of things we can do about it, but it's going to require a much deeper dive, not just into the physical systems themselves, but more so into the psychological and spiritual systems of the beings that are responsible in the space. It's a lot.
No, it's you.
On any given day, I question my life choices.
I would say that hopefully the universe is signaling to you a resounding yes, you're doing an excellent job and this is the right decision. You've touched upon also a lot of, it's the same old reprehensible colonial song, right? Extract, put a commodity in a global value chain, value add, sell in a market, co-opt, claim profit off of it, and then forget the source as well as the people who were a part of that value chain, as well as where the knowledge came from, not to mention the land from which it was growing, these sorts of things. Seemingly, the way in which industrialized agriculture, as well as in market forces, or I've heard the term desacralizing land and food before, where there are some schools of thought as well as philosophies in which land and sharing a meal and exchanging and producing food together and being on the land together is something that is sacred. And so it's basically like we're emptying out the way in which food is produced, the types of relationships that we have with the land, with the environment, with different ecosystems. As you mentioned too, with the soil, it's something that is a source of healing. The way in which that is severed from any type of spiritual or cultural connection. So now it's just basically become something that's not sacred and it's a commodity to be bought and sold as
Precisely.
merchandise on a market,
Mhm.
consumed and thrown away, these sorts of things. And it sounds like you're very much making pointed interventions into rectifying some of those arguably colonial and capitalist wrongs that are taking place, as well as into very much signaling and bigging up grassroots collective action, because it seems like that's what lies at the heart of a lot of your
Mhm.
work. Engaging
Yeah.
with people, meeting them where they're at, recognizing their humanity, thinking through healing, connection, and then also working the land and trying to find solutions to some of these challenges that are sort of plaguing agriculture, the food system, as well as even the economy. People aren't able to make a go of it in the Caribbean if they want to be a farmer. And that seems like a grave
Precisely.
injustice, yeah, unto itself. I'm
Very much
wondering,
so.
Sarah, you had mentioned you were talking about reconnecting as well as into maybe some of the solutions to these things. What are some things that give you hope with respect to a lot of the different types of challenges you've identified, a lot of the different obstinate insular modes of thinking? I find that those sometimes are deeply entrenched and quite authoritarian with respect to state institutions, multilateral, international financial institutions with respect to the types of project that you were talking about. So, what is the solution to some of the problems and challenges that you're looking at as well as intervening into on a day-to-day basis?
I'd like to think that they are solutions or they're contributing towards solutions, but I will simply speak to what I insist on giving my time to, my attention, my expertise to, that I genuinely feel is nudging it along in the desired direction. Yeah. As I mentioned before, working with individuals with whom there's already resonance. That's huge. It helps with a lot of the energy conservation. It certainly magnifies the efforts across everybody who's involved in the space. And so having started a few years ago with a core group of farmers, very simple idea, funded project, yes, but we knew what we wanted to build out, whether or not we had funding. And the pandemic, like for everyone else, threw a wrench, into the wheel. But maybe that is exactly what needed to happen, because it drew us all out of comfort zones we didn't even know we were in. And we had to find ways to make certain things work. Or where things couldn't work, maybe we didn't need them to work at that point in time. We learned to do without, put it that way, right? In some things. And then with others, we learned to improvise where we were lazy before and we said, maybe in a couple of years, or maybe when the technology, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so having that opportunity to think outside the box and build a virtual network that then has morphed into a network of farmers who communicate more with each other. We visit locations, we learn from each other. Yeah, there's no singular teacher and student. It's everybody on deck. Everybody's a student, everybody's a teacher. Everyone has something to show, explain, we discuss. Yeah. And so we've been consistently building out training modules, sharing literature, etc. Just really building a stockpile of information that is also being shared with a number of the young people in the space, children of some of these farmers, friends of these farmers, younger folks who are in the space, getting to find out, this is what is going on. I'd like to do that, or I'd like to try this, or come listen to this. Food has to be an integral part of this, but not in the typical Trini way where it's, well, yeah, the food was great. The content was, yeah, we don't know what they talked about, but the food was good. No. This is a case of, oh my God, that meeting just had my brain on fire. The food was amazing, but we talk about, people leave wondering, or knowing rather, where that food came from. Because in many cases, the food is coming from the land of the farmer whose place we met at, et cetera, right? And people sharing recipes, revisiting old, recipes from grandparents, etc., bringing things to communally share. But that is the backbone of the wider conversation now of how do we want to see this grow? What else do we have in mind? How are we going to do this together? And getting back into the whole GAIAP mode of doing things. Guys, we're doing this on X date. We need hands on deck. Who can show up?
And Sarah,
Yeah.
explain briefly GAIAP. It's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So for us here in Trinidad, the GAIAP, essentially it's okay, I can't give you the official, I don't know if I'm sure there's an official definition, but the way I've experienced it is it's a word that refers to lending a hand when someone else needs it, but you do it as a group. So it can be neighbors, it can be friends, folks with shared interests who've never met each other. We have a number of virtual groups like that now. We're exchanging all manner of traditional info with respect to plants, medicines, tools, etc. And when one person from the group needs to do X, they say, listen, I need help on this today, or I'm removing X, Y, and Z plants and I'm prepared to share it, but I need help to take it out. The group just assembles and we do what needs to be done. Yeah. So it's the lending a hand, lending a hand group style. Yeah. With no financial charge attached to lending your hand. So nobody's costing their services and saying, well, you need to do this for me in exchange. You do it because you want to do it. It benefits the group. It benefits you. Yeah. So everybody wins. Yeah.
Okay. Burn the plantation, build a GAIAP is what we'll go with for them.
Well, I won't say burn the plantation, Levi. I'm very
the colonial
anti-burning.
We'll metaphorically.
Yes, the concept. Yes.
Okay.
Because right now, today, it was brought to my attention that there's a new strain of the Panama disease that's pretty much going to be ripping through the region soon if we're not careful. And some of the proposed strategies involve scorching the soil, literally scorching the soil to burn this organism to smithereens. But it's not going to be in isolation, is it? And I could not help when I heard that. I could not help but think of the figurative scorching of the land and the people that's happening with all of the measures that are being instituted because folks just either, one, don't know that they don't know, despite their years of expertise and their credentials. They know, but they don't care because they're not, according to them, directly impacted, right? They don't see the connections. They view things in like we said, in silos. And so, well, it deals with the immediate threat. We'll deal with the repercussions later. Yeah. We can't continue like this. The system has dictated that we cannot continue like this.
What was the turning point that, led you to say, okay, well, this is the gateway drug. This is what, it is, and how it has been seen in like a political sense. So you talked about in academia, how cacao is seen, to some extent in the economic system, and locally as well as globally, in terms of how chocolate works. But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to talk about like your own personal turning point. Like, was it a conversation that you had? Was it an incident that happened that really fine-tuned cacao as being like, something that's super important to you, but also important to or a particular channel that people can use to get a solution or like revolution in a way?
Yeah, that's like the best question for me. No, I love it because it speaks so much to why I continue to do what I do. Because with cacao, when I walked away from it, I swore I was never coming back to it, right? After 13 years of research and all that good stuff. Okay. And because I had initially used research to hide from the world, because I was at one point a very, very painfully shy person, I felt that research was the place to go to hide from the world and not have to deal with those people called humans, right? But cacao had other plans and it drew me out into the open, literally and figuratively, right? By taking me into the farming space. And the more I worked with cacao and I got into, post-harvest processing and flavor development, because I was introduced primarily to specialty cacao in terms of looking at all the flavors, different flavors that we have, coming from our varietals in the region, etc. I started to dig deeper. What is responsible for flavor? And when you dig deeper on things like that, and how do you create a healthy plant? How do you create a healthy system? How is this all connected? Who's responsible for what? Wait, what? You don't have just one actor responsible here, and it's not in a jug. It's not in a spray can. It's like billions upon billions of actors that are collaborating in ways that humans have not even begun to fathom, right? The cooperation, the synergy, even if there's so-called competition, it's not the way we've painted it in the human space. And that really humbled me. I can't say that there was like a singular moment where it really hit me. Maybe there was, but I don't remember. But I talk to the trees a lot, right? I talk to the trees a lot. Because when I can't find solutions, I'm like, okay, no, really, I need help here. Like, seriously, I need a sign, right? It has never come to me like a flash of light or anything. It may come to me from an academic paper, like a signpost. You need to go down this road. Oh, what is that? Flavor being tied to nutrient density and ratios of nutrients, i.e. minerals in the plant. But how does the plant balance that? How does the plant get it? Okay, we started going deeper. So that's when I was introduced quite fortuitously to, an entire world of soil microbiologists and similarly, minded folks who just opened this whole other universe to me and made me realize that, whoa, in their own way, oh my God, I have got to go deeper with this cacao story. And cacao has become very, very much my gateway plant because literally and figuratively, cacao never stands alone. Cacao came from the Amazon. And this is how I teach. Where did this plant come from? Who else is it used to growing with? Who does it have deep connections with? What kind of anchoring does it need? Not just physically. What sort of underground connections and workforce does it need to be the best plant that it can be, but in the middle of deep, deep community? So for me, cacao has become the cacao and the system that it's embedded in, or at least it originally came from, rather, not what we've crafted with monoculture, right? It is deeply instructive. And the deeper I go now with the soil story, because I did get to a point where 2 years ago, when I literally said out loud, okay, Theo, because the scientific name for cacao is Theobroma cacao, right? So I call her Theo for short, because there's very much a feminine energy in the space here. Not to disregard the male, because this year I started recognizing that cacao is showing me some very, very interesting things.
We can disregard the male. That's perfectly fine.
No, we can't. Because then you can't truly understand one half by disregarding the other, and when it comes to energies in the space, there was a time when I would be like, in my scientific mode of, oh my God, these hippies again, and the whole woo-woo conversation, new age, mumbo jumbo, right? Well, hey, I'm on that soapbox now, but I'm coming at it with also the scientific understanding that helps to ground me and other people who are not there yet. Yeah. So for me, on so many levels, from the spiritual, because I have been involved in cacao ceremonies that have helped me understand certain things about myself, about the work that I'm doing, about the systems in which I'm operating. It's taken me to a level that science could not have taken me. Yeah. So on a very personal level, cacao has become cacao is like my Patronus. Cacao is my Patronus, right? So I'll leave it at that. Yeah,
I love that. I love that response. It's just like cacao is the gateway drug. The trees are the guides. Amazing.
Because that's my take on it, right? But when I come to work with farmers, chocolate makers, global north, global south, we're all on the same playing field because we all have senses. We all have needs, desires, wants. And when you cut away all of the, fluff, all of the credentials, all of the other issues that we continue to use as excuses to bog ourselves down. I'm not good enough to be able to learn this. I don't have this piece of equipment, so I can't do that. I didn't have this opportunity at school, so I can't. What? I shut that down immediately. I'm like, what are you prepared to do now? with what you have now and with the collective help that you have now. And I start simply by getting them to explore their own space in terms of the planted space, the food space, through taste, through descriptions, through touch, through smell, all senses on deck. That's how I teach now. And it blows my mind, but it's the most powerful set of techniques anybody could have introduced me to, you know? So this now is a way, at least it's the way that one of the ways that I'm using to get folks to reconnect with the land without having to say, you need to reconnect with the land. You need to reconnect with what you're eating. You need to eat healthier. No. Everybody's fed up of being told what they need to do. We need to create the enabling environment that will encourage people to explore. Yeah. So that we remove judgment. We make it an adventure. So that's why for me, I always say every day is an adventure for me. And that's how I intend to make it for those that I have the privilege of serving, those I have the privilege of working alongside, to have them understand you can't fail at this. You can't. And when you recognize that you can't fail at it, beyond the sky is your limit, right? Because it's like, what's holding you back now? If failing was your concern, if that's removed, right? What do you do? You know, like Keanu Reeves, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think among like the many like lessons that I've gotten from this conversation, I think it's one that is sticking out is the importance of the how, because I think the how and the approach and the mindset, you know, behind you know, what you're going about doing is like so important. So what is being taught, you know, in academic institutions as opposed to what you would have learned on the field and from farmers, and then from the trees, being so much more being extremely effective. And I feel like you've done this thing again where you answered a question that I had in my mind. But I'm going to tell you the question anyway, in case you wanted to add. Is, I guess, what message, you know, or advice do you have for young agri-scientists who might be listening? Because this podcast series would be listened to by, you know, lots of students, university students.
Okay.
So I think it's really interesting having the perspective from someone like you who has this type of relationship or like proximity to the institution, and has yet gone along this approach while still maintaining the usefulness of, you know, academic research and, you know, engaging with the work of the institution in this way. So what would you want to tell them, or would you want to tell our listeners?
Okay, so if I had to summarize that, two things I'd say. And one is going to preempt one of the rapid fire questions. Sorry, Levi. The first thing would be, it's going to be okay. I wish someone had said that to me when I was coming through high school and I was terrified that I would not survive past 18 years old. Yeah, because crime and drug use, etc., they painted such a bleak picture that I felt that I would be attacked around every corner. I lived in complete fear for a very long time. But I wish I had mentors in the space who were able to say, it's going to be okay. You can make your mistakes, yes, but you are going to be okay. The choice is really yours. I mean, there was a time when I'd be like, yeah, okay, yeah, nice fancy Hallmark coat, right? But when you begin to walk it, you recognize that it is true. We're extremely powerful beings, extremely powerful, but we only seem to think that we're powerful when we focus on you getting the positive response, right? We don't recognize that our power is also capable of multiplying the negative that we started here in the mind and in the heart, right? So it's really self-awareness. That has been my biggest eye-opener in this space. And again, tied to humility. Okay, Levi, I'll save it for the rapid fire question because it is something I want to absolutely share based on your question. Okay?
Listen, we do what we want on this show, but I appreciate you following the rules. So on that note, we will rush over to those questions because I really want to know what you want to say.
A little segment we call Rad Knowledge Beyond the Pod. Johanna, take it away.
The first question is, what is your favorite quote Who is it from and why?
Right. My favorite quote is from a chap, God rest his soul, because he's no longer alive, named Scott Dinsmore. When you question not what you can do, but why it's important to you, the how reveals itself, because the hunger is the how. And that is how I work in the space. So I always come from why. Any solution we're trying to find, I always ask why. And the solutions reveal themselves.
What social movements should listeners become familiar with and why?
Oh, hands down, the Cross-Atlantic Chocolate Collective. Hands down. So they can Google Cross-Atlantic Chocolate Collective and take it from there. Very, very, very powerful upending of what has been going on in chocolate across, like from the Caribbean to Africa, having farmers make their own chocolate, find the markets. It's extremely powerful. Definitely visit the site, follow them on Instagram. Amazing efforts by very, very amazing people.
What book is a must read and why?
Okay, I'm going to cheat here. I want to tell you about two books. So the first
Everyone
one
cheats all the time. Perfectly acceptable.
The first one is Reclaiming the Commons by Vandana Shiva. Very powerful, very, very powerful. Speaks to my soul, speaks to all of us, for all of us, and for all beings. Okay. And the second one is If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie. It is a clarion call to women everywhere, all ages. It is a must read by every single woman. And it's also a must read for men who intend to support women in the way that we deserve to be supported, because we need both. Yeah. So If Women Rose Rooted, powerful, life-changing, paradigm shifting.
I love that everybody just decides that they're going to give us 2 or 3 books or 2 or 3 answers. A liberated space. Love it. Number 4, what film is a must-see and why?
Oh my God, Fantastic Fungi. Fantastic Fungi. Must see. Must see. Because it isn't just about fungi, it's about connection, community, it's about relationships, quantum mechanics, everything rolled into one. Absolute model for humans recognizing the role that they have in the space, but learning from entities that have been here long before us, navigated the terrain, have the solutions built into the system, but require working together. Yeah, we have a lot to learn. Fantastic Fungi.
I love how that sounds. I feel like I just need to take like a vacation and just engage with all the books and the movies that people recommend.
Definitely.
Thank you for that. Number 5 is what song or musician is a must listen and why?
Honestly, the song that always comes to mind based on my current themes, One by U2. Because there's a line in it that really stands out for me, where we're one, but we're not the same. We've got to carry each other. We've got to carry each other.
I love
Very
it.
Gaia. Very Gaia.
Very Gaia. Exactly.
U2. Okay. We'll check them out.
The version with Mary J. Blige is it took it to a whole other level, soul-wise, message-wise. Yeah. U2 and Mary J. Blige.
I mean, of course, that's what Queen Mary will do. She will upgrade. Yes. She will upgrade a song.
Yes, she will.
Number 6, what artist, poet, thinker should listeners become familiar with and why? And this is our last question.
Bringing it back to Vandana Shiva. As a woman in the space, as an activist, as an environmentalist, as a scientist, I mean, she's married so many things for me and been such an amazing role model. Her writings are prolific. Her writings are subversive. They cause a lot of upheaval, but that's the point if you want to overthrow the system, right? But essentially, her story, her causes, her methods, her determination to build community, her determination to build autonomy in our communities, the self-sufficiency, just changing the narrative. And like I said, bringing it back to the same titled book, Reclaiming the Commons, because it's ours to share. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was our last question.
Thank you.
From Radical Knowledge Beyond the Pod. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Levi,
sorry I couldn't share chocolate. I blame Levi.
Yeah,
that will happen.
I mean, we need to, we need to
recognize when things are
done. Yes, that's my role, connector. I learned that a long time ago. I connect and then I move on.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe. To host or produce a series of Surviving Society,
get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.